Welcome to an episode of the Share Life podcast. I'm Jason Scott Montoya, and today we have a Listen to Learn episode. We're going to be diving into developing Nepal's poorest and most remote villages into thriving communities. Today we're here with Dan Maurer. Dan, say hello.
Ho, howdy ho.
Dan was connected to me by Denise Stilley, who we had on the podcast recently. So definitely be sure to go check that out. Dan is the president and founder of Elevate Nepal. His background is in business. He got a degree in business management and ended up doing a lot of construction work throughout his life and decided to take the plunge and go down the entrepreneurial route of starting a nonprofit, and not just any nonprofit, but an international nonprofit. So he wanted to go at it hard and take the most difficult challenge, and so he has done it. So he's going to tell us what he's learned and the experience he's had. So Dan, tell us about how did this all begin? I think it was 2015. There was an earthquake in Nepal. You had been involved at some point and decided to sort of shift gears. So tell us about that origin story.
Yep, you got it, Jason. So my first trip to Nepal was actually in 2011. I went over there mostly out of curiosity with a couple buddies. We ended up hiking to Mount Everest Base Camp, which took us a month. And then we ended up volunteering on farms for another 2 months, which was a great immersion into the country. But I always wanted to do something with Nepal. Thinking of like a cultural immersion or ecotourism type of program, but could never really get it moving. And, life kind of moves like this at times. But 2015, as you mentioned, Nepal got hit by a big earthquake, actually 2 of them back to back. They registered over 7 on the Richter scale.
Both of them were 7? And in what
Yep.
period of time were they what span between them?
2 weeks apart.
Wow.
So one hit, I believe the first one was a 7.6, and then that ripped kind of center of the country, and that went to the east. And kind of when that one stopped, 2 weeks later, a massive aftershock, which was the second earthquake, continued moving to the east and kind of did more damage. But
and is this an area that gets a lot of earthquakes, or is this rare for them?
Very common, very, very common. So you have your geography lesson. You have India, which is slamming into that Tibetan plateau, and that's what creates the Himalayas.
And so for people that may not be familiar with Nepal, is like we probably know it even if we don't know it. So kind of help us understand, what is this place that's pinned between India and Tibet?
Sure. Most people know Nepal because of Mount Everest. Tallest mountain on Earth, sits right between the China and Nepal border. It's a landlocked country. So to the north is China, and you have this massive barrier called the tallest mountains on Earth, the Himalayas, and then their other border is India to the south. A very underdeveloped nation. These are always changing, but I believe it was last year Nepal ranked 197 on the Human Development Index of close to 298 countries. So Human Development Index looks at education, health, and then the infrastructure that is in the country. So very underdeveloped, very poor, and in the other side of the world.
Yeah. So what's the state of the earthquake hits in 2015? What's the state of things, and what does the earthquake change or exaggerate?
Yeah, earthquake killed 9,000, injured 22,000. But the biggest number is it destroyed 1 million structures nationwide.
Wow.
Very rudimentary building techniques where most things are made out of stone and mud. So with all of those structures collapsed, the biggest thing people really needed immediately following the quake was just shelter. So that was one of the main things we did. I got into Kathmandu a few weeks after the quake and reconnected with an old friend, and him and his team had been scouting areas, and they were like, the main thing people need is tin. So we ended up distributing, I think it was like 5,000 pieces of that corrugated metal, just so they could build some structures to live in as temporary structures.
Yeah.
Thinking
So
that,
were you there when the earthquake happened?
I was not. No, I was
Okay.
here. I was here in the States.
Okay. So you went over there right after then?
Yeah, shortly after. This was even before we were a nonprofit. I did a private fundraiser on CrowdRise, and
Yeah.
I mean, looking back, how naive I was. I showed up with, I think, $7,000 in my pocket, like, "Whoa, I'm here to rebuild Nepal."
But it got
So,
you started at least, right?
yeah, that was the seed that really planted, that shifted
Yeah.
everything. So, back to what I started with, a cultural immersion or ecotourism program. Once we did that and we were quite effective in getting some of this aid out to people, I thought, well, that was good. What else can we do? And then that
Yeah.
is what really built Elevate Nepal.
So you officially formed the Elevate Nepal in 2017. So what happens between this earthquake and 2017? Are you simply doing what you're describing, or were there more to it than that?
Yeah, getting registered as a nonprofit, figuring out the governance and kind of what needs to be done to do this, staying in touch with people in Nepal and establishing more contacts. But it was very interesting what was happening in Nepal between, the end of 15 and when I returned in early 17. So what is that? About a year, 18 months or something. The rebuild efforts were absolutely stagnant.
Mm,
Revisiting those villages that we gave tin to people to build a temporary structure, 2 years later, they were still living in those.
yeah,
Just because the aid distribution was so slow, coming from a variety of sources.
yeah. And now your construction background, how did that help or hinder you, and in terms of this new rebuilding?
Great question. Knowing how to swing a hammer was helpful. um, Taking any sort of uh, thinking that we have in the West, you really have to go back to the basics. Just because they don't have the building material or the tools or um, just even the access to get to these areas. So thinking something as simple like, oh, we can prefabricate all these pieces in Kathmandu, the city, and bring them out to the village. It's just nothing works like that. So you really kind of had to return to the basics. But a big thing I learned too is we have to listen to the local people. They've
Mhm,
been living in these areas for multiple generations. They know what works and what doesn't work. Our main thing was providing the resources with knowledge of, can we bring tie beams together to make sure that everything is interlocked if we do have another shake? Can we support with more money so we can buy better building material? So it was really really interesting, and kind of moving forward is that's why I always work with Nepali engineers and local builders, because they know what's readily available instead of someone coming from the West.
mm. Was that something you were naturally inclined to do, or did you have to learn that the hard way in terms of listening to the locals and not doing it your own way?
That was definitely a learning thing.
Yeah,
But we learned pretty early on, which was good.
yeah. And were they receptive to the help, or how did the sort of cultural and language barriers play a role, or did they cause any kind of tension or challenges?
Yeah, just, there's always challenges with cultures and languages coming together. Things get lost in translation, as I say. But every community that I've worked with has been very receptive to, working with us. I think the most important thing that you need to do as an international nonprofit, that I see a disconnect in a lot of different ways there, is you have to build that relationship with the local community. And as I
Mm,
say, you have to listen to them. This is going to guarantee the success of whatever project you're doing, because it's their communities. They know what they need. They know what they want.
hmm
Again, we're just helping with knowledge and resources, usually in the uh, financial contributions, but connecting everybody with the population being served, local community. what the government can offer and then what a nonprofit will. That just takes time.
Yeah.
But it's so important to build those relationships so everybody, it's all transparent with your donors and the community, and that you're just effective. That's the most important.
Yeah. Yeah. So rewind for us a bit, just to help us understand how Nepal kind of ended up in this situation where an earthquake like this would devastate the country. What's the history of Nepal as a nation? Why isn't it part of China or India too, versus it's kind of its own thing? And then how did it become so poor and broken?
Good question. How much time do we have? It's, again, like I said, it's a landlocked country, very diverse in terms of ethnicity. So you have 100 and they just upped it. There's 141 different caste systems or tribes in Nepal, all speaking their own tribal language. So
Mm,
if you look at the Himalayas, you have your flatlands, you have your middle belt, then you have the high mountains. You had people moving across there from like Myanmar, also people coming in from like Afghanistan, and then you had Hindu people coming up out of the south, out of India, and then other people coming across Mongolia, across that Tibetan plateau, and then everybody kind of meshing in the middle
hmm
of the Himalayas. So once borders were, a lot of people were nomadic and would move with the seasons or hunters and gatherers. But once borders were established and land and territories established, people kind of got trapped in their zones.
mm,
So some of that also stripped people of cultures and identities and their inability to do their nomadic lifestyle.
yeah.
So yeah, that's but it's such an interesting thing because it's still so rich in culture. You have 142 different castes or tribes. And one could sit on one hillside speaking their language, and then on the next hillside is complete different language and cultures and food and
Yeah.
traditions. But they don't communicate with each other
Yeah.
at times. Yeah, it's
So
fascinating.
with the caste system, is that religiously driven or is it something else? And then if there are different religious traditions intersecting, how does it play out in that sense?
So it's my understanding the caste system to kind of form the society of Nepal came from India, came from a Hindu
Hmm.
system. There's a caste system in
Yeah.
Hinduism. So the Nepal government, which was a monarchy at the time, kind of adopted that system to um, categorize people. Um, so caste kind of is used interchangeably with tribe, but there
Mm,
is still a bit of a hierarchy that does happen in Nepal. So someone of a certain caste or tribe, let's say, if they're considered a higher caste, they usually reside in the cities where they have access to education and better facilities. A lower caste tribe usually stays out in the villages and has more of a traditional type of lifestyle.
so they're more rural in that sense.
Yeah.
And okay, so you have this diverse mix of people from different countries and different places. I mean, how do they talk to each other if the language is so fragmented?
So Nepali is the base language. So that's, the international language, but you do get to a lot of places, especially in the urban areas, or sorry, rural areas, where people won't speak Nepali. Um, but it's not uncommon for a Nepali person to speak 4 or 5 different languages. So
Mhm.
Nepali's kind of the base, but they might speak their tribal language amongst their family and their community. But then when an outsider or a different caste comes, then Nepali is your kind of base.
Mm.
Um,
And is
but very,
Nepali
very,
related to another language, or is it its own thing?
it's its own thing, but it's probably most closely associated with Hindu.
Okay, so its
Uh,
origins are probably from India. Then it sounds like.
yeah, like some of the words are interchangeable.
Yeah.
Just
So why
with
is Nepal not just a state in India then? Why is it? How did it get separated, or how did it become its
it
own thing?
once it was established, it was its own kingdom. It was its own
Hmm.
monarchy. for years, the Silk Road, one of the main trade routes, was through the Kathmandu Valley. Coming
Oh,
up
okay.
out of India and then to other parts of Asia. I don't know the year, but they found an easier route around the Himalayas through Sikkim,
Okay.
which is a territory in India.
Oh,
But
okay.
that kind of developed the Kathmandu Valley with
Mm.
merchants and trade people, and it was a pass through.
Oh,
But
okay.
then a monarchy till early 2000s, and then everything kind of changed after that. But Nepal prides itself on it was never colonized.
Mm.
So, colonization, which however you want to think about it, whether it be bad or good, it does leave behind a lot of things in terms of the infrastructure and educational
Mm.
structures. But Nepal never really had that. They did have a lot of influence from the East British Company out of India, but they were never colonized. So it kind of also explains the state of why Nepal is the way it is now, along with, um, the geography being so dramatic, and then all these different tribes. So
Yeah.
it really, Jason, it's things like I've been working in and out of there for 12 years, and some days I get it, and other days I got no idea what's going on.
Yeah. Well,
So I
what
kind
is the yeah, well, what is it about the local people and culture that doesn't that they lack something that creates the type of infrastructure that you're talking about? Like, what is it that drives that, or that they're missing, or maybe it's something else altogether? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, lack of planning.
Hmm.
Probably at the government level, I have to be a little bit careful how I say this. Uh, but just not having access to those resources, and then the knowledge. Still very, very isolated, these communities. Just for example, most of the places we work in don't have the big six that I talk about. There's no road access, there's no water, there's no electricity, there's no toilets, there's no school, and there's no health post. So, if you look at, say, we want to build a school, but some places there's no road access, where you might be walking 2 to 3 days just to access that
Hmm.
village. So, how are you going to start to build things if you can't even get building material in there that needs to be flown in by a helicopter, which is kind of a new technology for Nepal, or all carried? So that just limits you in terms of the actual development of a place.
And so that sounds like a big part of the problem is that people live so far apart and they're in the mountain, and it's it's fragmented in its geography, as well as as well as the people being spread out, and there's just the difficulty of the geography. It sounds like is a big part of that.
Yeah, I remember after the quake, the director of the UN, he got on and he was talking about how difficult it's going to be to distribute aid in Nepal versus other places, just based on that fact that you mentioned, the geography. Again, villages that were completely flattened, reduced to rubble, and you had a high death count. But these are 3 days walk from any sort of facilities. It's like, how, and that's a dime a dozen. It's like, how do we get aid into these places?
Yeah, and it sounds. I mean, I'd imagine when the earthquake happened, it was months and maybe even years before some of those villages even got any help. Right?
It it's true. When I went back to visit those villages, as I said, 2 years later, people still living in those structures. 2018 is when things started to really kick off in terms of aid money being distributed for the people, which was good. But almost 3 years of no efforts, or no plan. It
Yeah.
was that was tough.
Yeah, so you have the geography challenges, you have the lack of infrastructure and systems. What what about is any of it related to um people's choices, as far as it could either be leadership or different groups, these different tribes that you described? In other
Yeah.
words, where they do have the resources and information, but they don't necessarily do what is best for everyone involved. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's another good point to make is, some of these very traditional tribes don't want to be disturbed. You see this all over the world, but we've gone to speak to some communities that they're very happy with their traditional way.
Yeah.
So where is it to us to say, well, we need to bring water, we need to build a school? It's if they're happy there, then namaste, enjoy. But kind of where people are getting forced is as the development, like the encroachment of the roads happen around these communities, they're really getting choked. And then climate change is another big issue of food scarcity starting to pick up. So having to relocate um, where you live, but then not having any money to be able to do that. So then you're seeing people come down to the cities and not having any sort of skill to contribute, so they'll become a laborer, and then just kind of the problems stem from there. What was the original question? Right. So some people, don't want to be disturbed, but people are also getting displaced by the government for a variety of reasons, or just because they can't survive in their homeland anymore.
So if the earthquake in its tragedy was destructive, was there also any kind of response from people to maybe be more open-minded to different ways, like, hey, the way we were building things, or maybe we should have higher standards, or maybe we should do this or that differently? Did the country see any kind of shift in the mindsets of people as a result of the earthquake in terms of improving things?
Definitely. So the government formed the Nepal Reconstructive Authority. So that's where all money was filtered through, but they put in different building standards. So, based on the structure, you do have to have like tie beams, and there does need to be iron rods to make sure that things, if it were to shake again, it wouldn't collapse. So that's been a huge benefit. And they haven't had any big ones since then, but they have consistent shakes, and the new infrastructure has held up. So that's been a huge positive for sure.
Yeah. Was there any part of the country that was disproportionately harmed by the earthquake? In other words, were the city buildings stronger than rural ones, or vice versa? Or was it kind of the same across the board?
Yeah, the city, Kathmandu, there was quite a bit of damage, but the urban environments did hold up better than the countryside.
Okay.
But it's
Now,
kind of, right in that middle was where the destruction was the most severe.
yeah. So here you have this monumental tragedy. You're going in with $7,000 to fix the country. You're in over your head. How do you level up yourself and establish this organization to do more than you and your $7,000
All right.
could?
Yeah. So after that, again, made a good connection with a friend, guy named Resham Ball. So he's our in-country coordinator, and he's director of operations on the Nepal side. He's a Nepali native. So once I came back to the States, looked at how to get registered as a 501c3, what's going to be our mission, how are we going to do it? Established all that, went back to Resham. This is also a very, very important thing to do in international nonprofit, is we also became registered with the Nepal government. So it's good. So they help with all permits, and they really protect us if anything were to happen.
Protect
so
you from who?
So we can legally operate in the country. If there's any sort of backlash, if there's anything that could go wrong, if there's an accident, but also that allows us to get government money as well. So we can partner with the local government to get subsidies for some of the projects.
Okay.
So yeah, then it came, now we're registered, we're fully compliant, let's go. And then, we get our 501c3 in the States, and me thinking, oh, now the money will pour in for aid distribution, right? I mean, everybody wants a tax write-off. So, and it kind of grown from there. We did full-time earthquake resistant homes. We ended up building a school for 700 kids. We have a heavy focus on agriculture and helping with employment and income sources. advancing public health in the rural communities. But most of our main focus is on the rural community development.
So, well, two questions there. One is, what is the sort of mindset and money allocation towards education in the country? In America, everyone, it's almost like a right to go to elementary, middle, and high school. That's something we probably take for granted. But what is it like in Nepal?
In terms of percentage of kids who go to school?
In terms of just even the school being provided by the state to be available to them if they want to go, or mandating it like it is in our country, at least through high school.
Yeah, good question. So how the kind of structure set up is you have government schools and then private schools. Most of kind of like we have here, public and private, but government school, of course, is quite a bit cheaper. I can't quite remember. It's, I don't know, $10 a month or something to send the kid to school. But the problem is the quality of the education and the access to that education, especially in the rural areas. So, for example, some of the places we work in, you have classes that only go up to grade 5. So if they want to continue their education beyond grade 5, they'll have to go to a neighboring village, which sometimes is a day's walk away. And then maybe that school only goes up to grade 8. And then they have, eventually it's moving into the urban environment like Kathmandu if they want to get a higher education.
Yeah. So do you have like third graders walking a day's thing to go to school by themselves?
Oh yeah, if they have to go that far, usually there'll be a hostel or a place they'll stay. But I would say 2 to 3 hours each way is not untypical for the mountains.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
But then you have, it's such a survivalist type of lifestyle as we would know it. So a lot of classroom time is missed when, the annual harvest comes because they have to help with rice or corn or whatever they might be working on.
Yeah.
Then you have this horrific monsoon that, douses the country for 3 months a year. So it's kind of like hibernation time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was so last year I went to Honduras on a short-term mission trip with 2 of my kids, and it was to in Honduras in a very rural part of the country. And that was one of the things that Honduras prioritized is providing education. And so there was actually multiple schools. They were very small and simple, but they were in these rural villages. And they were nice for what they were, but the government was at least putting money into that and then placing them in their locations. So
that was a good response to the earthquake. Actually, Jason, you make a good point of a lot of money went into rebuilding schools from the government level. So you do see nice facilities, newer, nicer facilities in the urban areas. So the government has made a huge effort to make a platform for education. I think just, again, back to the geography and cultural differences, I think it's not as good as it could be, but we could say that about America as well.
Yeah. So why the poor in the remote villages? So I mean, there's probably a lot of need there. You could pick a lot of different missions. Is it simply that those are the ones that were being neglected or needed the most help, or was it something else?
Yeah, you hit it on the head. It was, our board of directors, myself, and then our operations team. It was like, if we're going to do this, let's get to the areas who need it the most, which is tough to go through because as a Westerner showing up in Kathmandu, they need a ton of help. But once you get even farther out there, it's like, one village that we're working in now to help with our water distribution project of building the infrastructure to bring water to every home, they're still walking a couple hours a day just to collect water. And that's one trip. So if you run out of water, you gotta do it a couple more times. So let's help the people that still don't have access to some of the basics.
Yeah. So help us understand a little bit more about your mission. You're trying to help them to transform into these what you've described as thriving communities. So you're not just there to sort of hand them food and keep giving them stuff. It's really to create a self-sustaining community, from what I understand. So tell us more about that, what that looks like, and why you took that approach.
Sure. Yeah. So, speaking to the rural community development project that we're in, um, we first went out there thinking we would build another school. But once we got out there, it was like, well, goodness, they don't have the big six that I just mentioned. So back to building that relationship and asking these communities, and we looked at dozens and dozens of just what do you want and what do you need and can we help? So this one area in particular, it was like the water is our biggest issue.
Mm.
Certain sources have gone dry because actually the earthquake shifted the water table and cut off reliable water sources. But they're like, we need to somehow get water into this village, and then from there we can, think about other things like public health and education and all that stuff. But let me see. Can't remember where I was going to go. But yeah, starting at that local level, but really, really listening to them in terms of what they want and what they need.
Yeah. And so the self-sustaining dynamic, tell us more about that.
Right. So, nonprofit is a funny business too, because your model is to give away money and then also work your way out of a job.
Yeah.
um, so like I always say, it's their communities. They're the ones who are doing it, and they're the ones who are going to, implement all these things. But they are relying on Elevate Nepal to provide the resources with, skills and finances. But how do we make sure that these are functional systems after Elevate Nepal leaves? And that's going to, once again, take a lot of time. So what we do is, one, it's all a community formed committee who makes all the decisions. So it's run by one person of each household. So they make the decision of what we're going to implement and how we're going to execute it. And they help to get us permits from the government, who kind of oversees all this stuff. But then we do a lot of vocational training. So our engineer and our main builder is out there. So if we're not in the village and a pipe breaks, they have the knowledge to be able to fix that. So this is a common problem that I see all over Nepal that may be simple in our minds, but it's you see a problem that is so minute, like an elbow, a plastic elbow that broke, and all that needs to happen is somebody just needs to glue it together. But no one was trained at the local level to do that, and there was no money in a rainy day fund to be able to fix it. So you have these entire water systems or plumbing systems that are non-functional because nobody took the time to actually train somebody.
Yeah. And it's such a small problem that, at least for us, we think, oh, I could just fix that in a few minutes or an hour.
Right.
And yet they lack whatever they need to be able to do that same thing.
And you
Right.
Right, and you can't go to Home Depot and you can't call a plumber. You're a day's walk from the road. So it's almost like I describe it as somebody comes into your town in Atlanta and is going to install a solar panel, a solar system on your house.
Mm,
Um, but they have no service maintenance program to help you. So once your solar system breaks, what are you going to do? You might get up there and kind of wiggle some wires around, hoping it starts to function again, but ultimately you don't have the skills to repair it yourself, and there's no
mm,
repair guy you can call, so the system is a bust. Just apply that to some of the infrastructure projects that we're working on.
yeah. So does that mean that, which problem do you solve there? Do you build in a simpler way so that they can access and fix things, or do you have a better supply chain system so that they have the tools they need to be able to um to do what they need to do? You
Yeah,
kind of go
number
two
two.
directions. Yeah.
Yeah, using the best material that we can find is important, just for the functionality and longevity of the system. But making sure people have the connections that they need. If they can't fix it at that local level, if they don't have the spare part, that they can call our main plumber and he can send out a team to diagnose that. Um, but it all comes back to another big thing about the sustainable part of it. It all comes back to money, right? So even if they do need to buy material to fix something and they're so poor, it's how are they going to have the money to do it? So there is government funding that'll help with these things. So the government can subsidize with that. And that's all the importance of building these committees and making sure everything is very transparent. Elevate Nepal is helping at the moment to subsidize this. But the other thing is everybody's paying a small monthly fee for the use of the infrastructure. So it's so small, but it is going into a kitty that they will end up using in the future to repair these things. It's so small right now, but it's like you got to start from somewhere and build on there.
Yeah.
Hopefully that if something goes wrong, we're us or the government is not dependent, or they're not dependent on us.
So that fund is designed to make them self-sustaining from a financial standpoint.
Yep, exactly. So you have the skills, you have the finances, and then you just have the buy-in and empowerment at that local level. So then we're not needed. So we've worked ourselves out of a job.
Yeah.
But we're talking years of doing this.
Yeah. So do you focus then on a single community and you get it to that point and then you go to the next one, or do you have multiple that you're working with at the same time?
Kind of the one that I'm speaking about now is, we're in year 2 or 3 of this. So this is going to kind of become our model. This has been one that we've spearheaded ourselves, but other communities we work with, they're a little bit more advanced. So every community, it's a bit different depending on where you are. And that's just, maybe they've already have this established, they know what they need and all things like that, or they have the committee already ready to go. And then we can kind of help in different capacities.
Yeah. So, what are other aspects of your nonprofit that you're doing or working with that you haven't already described or explored?
Let's see.
Or have we done it all?
The other two other one of our initiatives. So our initiatives, we do employment, education, public health, and infrastructure. So I've kind of described that. I guess the other two things we do is another big problem in Nepal is out migration. So a ton of people going to the cities and abroad to seek education and employment. So a third of Nepal's GDP comes from remittance. Another 10% 10 or 12% comes from tourism. So almost 50% of the money in Nepal is generated by a foreign income source. So a big thing that we try to do is to curb this out migration, which will help preserve cultures and family structures, is to help using readily available resources to provide that income source. So what is Nepal's most valuable resource? Is its fertile soil. Nepal doesn't manufacture anything like metals and things that we might know in the West, but its soil in the Middle Belt is very, very rich. So one of the big things that we've done is working with an agriculture school to teach the next generation about sustainable organic agriculture, but also tying the economics into that. So tying onto that is a big cash crop that we've been working with is coffee. So I've been working with the coffee farmers since my first trip in 2011, and then we import the green beans to America, and then 100% of the profits are returned to support those communities. So generating an income source right there to kind of help curb this out migration, but not bringing in foreign materials, like not setting up a factory and kind of all these things, using stuff in-house.
So what kind of what resources does Nepal have, in its own geography in terms of farming lands or even natural resources or trades and so on, like the coffee, in terms of, I assume they also, do they just grow it or do they do steps of the process beyond the growing at all?
Everything. So, kind of from seed to export of the green bean, and then we import it here and roast it and sell it. But coffee is becoming a lot more popular in Kathmandu. So you're seeing coffee shops pop up where they're selling a lot more of the product in country, which is great. They're generating their own revenue source right there. But in terms of the resources that Nepal has, it's, again, that the middle belt, the soil is so rich. Most of that coming from water. It's a very water abundant country. So but it's a little bit like the desert where you have feast or famine with
Yeah.
the rains. So you're making diversions and having access to water through natural sources also helps with the agriculture side of it. But
Yeah.
land and water are its two most valuable resources.
Okay. And being landlocked, how does that limit the country?
It's everything is expensive. um, so airplane tickets in and out and shipping anything is expensive. To do commerce, I guess I would say that's what really that's what makes everything expensive. But if you were to come out with your commerce to get out to a port, your closest one is Calcutta. So it would have to move through the dilapidated roads of Nepal and then down into India and then to a port and kind of out from there, which could take anywhere up to a week or 10 days just to move a truck from A to B.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
So yeah, very
yeah, I
limiting.
imagine that's even more the case the further you get away from the city and into the rural and the mountains. And the top of Mount Everest is probably the hardest place to get to there.
It is. It is. I think they're sending people up in drones now. I don't know what they're doing.
Now, is that a positive thing that there's so much tourism and the Everest attraction in terms of bringing money to the country, or is it kind of create its own problems as well?
Hmm. Um, the revenue boost is great. It does supply thousands, tens of thousands of people with seasonal jobs. Um, the impacts, though, are very clearly seen in terms of just the waste and the waste generated human waste and plastics and kind of all these things. They've done a lot better. There's been a lot of more rules and regulations around in the tourism industry to help kind of clean that up. But it goes back to some of the basics of not having those systems or infrastructure in place that if you got a team that's, a 7-day walk from a road and they're drinking a bunch of stuff out of plastic bottles, it's not a garbage man to come by and collect it.
Mm,
So how are you going to kind of get all those out of there? And then once you do, where's it going to go? You don't really have a sorting facility and all that. It's great for people to come to Nepal and help boost the local economy. I think I'll leave it there.
yeah, yeah. So now, what you're doing? You're helping this country. You were born in Rochester, live in Flagstaff now, where I'm from. Um, Are there other organizations that are doing things as well? Are you kind of one of many, or are you one of the only ones doing this work?
There are many. I don't know the number. At one point in time, I looked it up, but there are many nonprofits working in Nepal, from small grassroots stuff up to up to government level, working with embassies. Um, but of those who are doing that, very few are actually registered. So the main point I would make on all of that is just making sure that everything is compliant and you are registered with that government, because things can just go a little bit funny, or there could be misunderstandings if they're not. A lot of people are in there with great intentions and doing fantastic work, but everything needs to be very transparent, and it's so important to be working with those local communities and the government. So just so everything is very clear. But yes, there
Yeah,
are quite a few other nonprofits working there.
yeah. So, what are some of the dynamics when it comes to just having an international nonprofit? Um, Both in terms of you're here in America half the year and you're there half the year, and um, I'm the legal layers and fundraising. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think I wrote in a grant once, we have a myriad of challenges. Just the physical time it takes for me to get from here to there. To get to some of these projects might take me almost a week, from where I sit right now here in Flagstaff. but again, building a strong team on the ground in Nepal, which again, I'm trying to work myself out of a job where I'm not needed, and we can, support sustainable income for everybody there. Have a livelihood. Probably one of the biggest challenges working in international is understanding the rules and regulations of both sides of the globe. So everything we have in the States, we also have over in Nepal, because we're just two fully registered entities. We got a board of directors on the state side, board of directors on the Nepal side, lawyers, accountants on each side of the globe too. So your funding needs to be doubled kind of for those sort of things. So yeah, there's just, and then cultures and different things that the East and the West mixing together. It's a beautiful thing to share cultures and languages across continents, but you have to be sensitive with some of the things you're working on as well.
Yeah. So what's it like in that sense to learn a second first language in the sense of culturally, using language as like a cultural idea? What is it like to learn another culture in a way that you can understand it from the way that they see it? Does that make sense?
It's Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful and great, but you have to have the right mindset. You have to be very open to things, and you have to let my comfort zone is very wide, but you have to also kind of let your guard down in certain ways. Your creature comforts have to disappear, and you have to adapt and do things the way um they do at the local level, because you don't want to insult anybody, or you don't want to do something wrong. Is even as simple as one story that I love of a name who I'll omit, is he was in a meeting with a government official, and they were trying to come to an agreement on a financial thing, and he turned and he crossed his legs, and now his foot is pointed at the main guy that he's speaking to. Now, here in the States, we cross our legs and, whatever it might be. He crossed his legs. His foot is pointed directly at the guy. That is a huge sign of disrespect. I mean, it's like if you point your feet towards somebody, or an altar, or a picture of the Dalai Lama, something like that. I mean, that's up there with one of the worst things that you can
It's
do.
like
But
flipping them off or something in a way. Yeah.
right. Yeah, just about. So, kind of learn. And if people are very nice most of the time,
Yeah.
they explain it to you and whatnot, but you have to, you're never going to learn these things if you just don't take the time to be a part of it, to get amongst it.
Yeah. So it sounds
So.
like it's not a place for the prideful. Humility required.
Right. Yeah. And that's an interesting thing. I absolutely love Nepal. I mean, it has stolen my heart. There's a saying amongst expats there that you come for the mountains, but you return for the people. And
Mm,
that is 100% true. But even someone working in my job role with another nonprofit, or with the government, a lot of them still struggle to spend long stretches in Nepal, because it is very uncomfortable.
mm.
Just the roads there, you're getting thrown around in jeeps, and trying to things don't happen at the rapid pace that we're used to in the West. It can get very frustrating. So, even other nonprofits that we work closely with, if they're out of the States or the UK, I hear a lot of them who are in my position who say, I can only do about a week or two a year. And,
Yeah.
it's fair enough, but making sure they have a structure in place to be able to do things when they're absent. But in Nepal, they always say Sapai Garocha, which means everything is difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting because um the barriers like we've been talking about with geography or infrastructure, cultural or language, there's just a life is difficult barrier. And so if you want to help people there, you have to descend into that difficulty.
Yep, you have to, yeah, get into it and really embrace it and accept it.
Yeah.
That's, especially when you do work with um, just things that take so much time, of like opening a bank account. I opened up a new bank account a couple of years ago. It took like 6 weeks for me to do this. Now
Yeah.
in the States, we can do it online, but it's just, again, systems that aren't fully functional or make sense that it's I mean, literally it can drive a Westerner insane, but you have to just, I mean, embrace it and say, well, okay, I'll come back again tomorrow with this other piece of paperwork. um
Yeah.
so conducting business there is oh my goodness, it's hilarious.
Yeah. Now, why do you come back to the States? Why not just be there all the time? Why come back to Flagstaff and operate there? What's the purpose of that?
That'd be nice. My role is I'm involved with every aspect of Elevate Nepal, from the fundraising here in the States to the project implementation on the ground in Nepal. So I'm stretched like a rubber band a lot. But I absolutely love it. Coming back to the States, what a privilege I do have to be able to come back and have a wonderful place to live and see family and all that great stuff. But business duties on this side of with fundraising and admin and communications and kind of all that stuff still requires a bit of my time.
Yeah. So what are the lessons, when you think about this, 9-year journey now, or longer if you go back before the 2000 earthquake, this decade long journey or more? What
Yep.
what are some of the things that you've learned or that where you've really grown as a person and a leader?
Patience. But I still, every morning I pray for patience. I need more of it. I think this is something we're all looking for in our life. Um, I get a lot, Jason, people to say, well, you've helped so many people. But I always flip it to be what the country of Nepal, the people have done for me. And this was recognized by an older friend in Flagstaff a few years back. He goes, think of where you've gone spiritually and have grown as a human being over your time of working in Nepal. So yes, I'm very proud of all of our donors and everybody coming together to have our mission impactful and help so many people in Nepal. But what they have done for me, I can't even. I don't even know the words to start with it.
Yeah.
It's been a very a beautiful and rewarding journey for myself.
Yeah, it's a mutual thing. It's not a one-way relationship. It's and this idea with the podcast is called Share Life, and that's derived from my personal mission statement, which is to share life. And part of the idea of that is it's to give and to receive. It's to learn and to teach. It's the mutual um, connection between the relationship that we have with each other.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
and I love that, Jason, and to do that in our own communities here in Atlanta or Flagstaff, but to be able to share that across cultures and continents is really a fantastic thing.
Yeah.
Um, so when we do have volunteers or people come over to Nepal, I'm always welcoming. Just come and see it and just talk to people and learn from them and have them learn from you. It's just a great way to share and make us all better people.
Yeah. So if someone, there's a lot of nonprofits, there's a lot of international nonprofits, there are a lot of countries that need help, there are a lot of people that need help. So how, obviously you're trying to serve a specific need and you need help to help those people. What's your message to those people that might be interested in volunteering, giving, or simply sharing the message that you have?
It's there's so many needs all over the world, as you touched on, and I commend anybody who is doing humanitarian work in any capacity. My heart has fallen in Nepal and I've dedicated my life to this work. um, so I always invite anybody to join our mission, whether that be through volunteering or making a financial contribution or simply sharing our story through a social media platform or our email communications. Um, But kind of the thing that separates us, I believe, from other nonprofits, I'll speak specifically about Nepal, is we are very, very open and transparent about our mission and where your donor dollars will go. I believe there's a big disconnect in the nonprofit philanthropy world anyway between your donor or your philanthropist, the implementing party, which would be Elevate Nepal, and then the population served. The implementing party, which is the nonprofit, they're the ones who need to kind of bridge that gap between everybody. And we do the absolute best we can. I think we can do better in some ways, but that's where everybody feels connected. And we're doing all of this together. So, when I invite people to be a part of our mission, we're doing this together. Whatever you want, come to Nepal, whatever you need from us to show the journey of your donor dollars of the people that are impacted. Very happy to share and talk about those things.
Yeah. So let's fast forward. It's a year from now, January 5th, 2025. What's the story you tell about 2024 in terms of your mission?
I'll be retired and, just just laughing away. Great, very good question. Something I haven't thought of. Probably this is going to be a big year for us. We're going to service our third village with water, electricity, and new toilets. And that was kind of our goal when we started 3 years ago. So by the time this whole thing is done, 3 huge villages three villages that are very spread out will have all those services, impacting over 600 people. And so that'll be a great highlight for us. We're doing our medical camp again, which will service a couple thousand more people, and then turning our focus on that community. I've been mostly speaking about of, can we get a school in there? Can we improve can we get a health post in there? What is kind of our next development for that area? So in a year from now, looking back, hopefully we've accomplished all that. Hopefully we've also gained some new supporters, which of course we always need, because when we first started to where we are now, our budgets have increased significantly.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else you want to share that you haven't had a chance to do so?
Not really. I think just kind of my ending message really is this has been the opportunity of my life to work with the people of Nepal. I wake up every day and don't know what I have done to be so lucky. And I have the best job in the world, because I get to go live with these communities and build relationships and get to know them on a very, very personal level. But none of this would be possible without the generosity of our donor base. And they're really the ones that are making all of this happen. So once again, I invite anybody to be a part of our story and join us, in unbelievably grateful for the continued support of our very loyal donor base.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing. How can people connect? What's your website? Are you on social media?
Yep, elevatenepal.org. But Google Elevate Nepal, you'll find us. And then social media, just put it into any of the search browsers, is Elevate Nepal. And I also welcome anybody to contact me directly. There's my email on the website, and reach out at any time for anything. As you can see, I like Nepal and I like to talk about it.
That sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Dan. I appreciate you sharing with us today and helping us to learn about Nepal and its the country and the people you're serving, and the things you're doing to help them thrive.
Well, thank you, Jason, and you are welcome in Nepal anytime. So start planning your trip with your wife and 5 kids.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, man. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, you're welcome.